introduction thing all over again. Okay. So welcome back. This is week 4. Oh my God, already 4 weeks. That means we have been here for a month. So we're doing introduction to vulnerability management this week. Again, next week we'll be doing vulnerability management again. One of the largest part of an ISO's job is vulnerability management. And again, all of the courses are all designed by myself and the other instructors. So bear with us. We don't have any fancy software companies or any management that overlooks these courses. So let's get into it. So, what is a vulnerability? A vulnerability is a weakness found in a system. It can be in an application, a process, or configuration. Essentially, anything that could be exploited or can compromise a system. So, for an easier way to think of it, you want to think that, a lock on a door, it's a security control, right? That lock. A broken lock would be a vulnerability. A burglar using or taking advantage of that broken lock would be a threat. A house getting robbed would be the impact, right? So we start with the door locked, but if it's broken and someone breaks into it, that is the impact of someone being able to take advantage of that broken lock. So in terms of tech, a vulnerability can exist in software that will have outdated apps, may have bugs in the code, systems, so unpatched servers, misconfigurations, open ports, no multi-factor authentication, and then of course people processes. These are actually the weakest links. Are people processes, weak passwords, no training. So if you're going to take the Security Plus exam or any other exam, your key takeaway here is a vulnerability equals a weakness. A threat is something that can be exploited, and a risk is what happens if that threat is exploited or that weakness is exploited. Does anyone have any questions there? Okay. So what is vulnerability management, right? So if you have a vulnerability, you have to have a way to management. So vulnerability management is a continuous process of identifying, evaluating, prioritizing, and fixing security weaknesses or vulnerabilities in systems. So I created a little chart here on how we step through getting through to vulnerability management to give you guys a visual. So step one, and you guys may be familiar with this because we talked about in the first class, I think it was the infrastructure, right? So it's kind of like stepping through the infrastructure again. And remember, we talked about that VPN and that boundary, and everyone was confused about how VPN came first before authentication, right? So step one is setting up the network. So these includes your VLANs, your firewall rules, your configurations of the network. Step two is your server and your cloud provisioning. So whether it be on-prem or in the cloud, you want to set up your infrastructure. Step three is onboarding of your personnel. So issuing those employee laptops as we talked about in the infrastructure class. Step four is your asset inventory and discovery. So when you are on the job, hopefully your job has some type of what they call CMDB or discovery tool. Some people use Landsweeper, if not CMDB, but there's tools out there that you could use to manage and discover your assets, right? So these will, scour the network and see what's on your asset, and then hopefully the onboarding teams or your desk side engineering should be also implementing these tools into the CMDB or some type of asset inventory tool. And then step five would be your vulnerability scanning tools. So once assets are known, vulnerability tools such as Rapid7 or Tenable scan the assets for various vulnerabilities. And that's how it goes from setup, infrastructure, all the way through to an ISO. And this is why I say it's important to understand the infrastructure setup so that you understand how it gets to you at the end of the day, right? So common frameworks and standards in vulnerability management. You have your CVSS scores. So if Tenable or Rapid7 scans your assets. If you guys take a look at the vulnerability report that you guys downloaded last week, you'll see that there was a CVSS score there. We've already kind of covered the breakdown, so I'm not going to go over that too much. You have your EPSS score, which is your exploit predicting scoring system. So how likely is it that the vulnerability that exists can be exploited, right? So it predicts the likelihood of exploitation. Typically that's on a Rapid7 report as well. And then your KEV score, or known exploited vulnerability score, which is issued by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, lists vulnerabilities that are actually active and being exploited in the wild. So if your vulnerability is listed on the KEV, you need to treat it as a high priority immediately and work with your teams to get it remediated, because that means that it's actively being exploited by hackers, and it's only a matter of time, potentially, if someone is able to actually attack your system because they're actively exploiting that vulnerability. Yes, Melissa.
Would you treat that one like as a 0 day? Like what would the time frame to remediate that be? A KEV vulnerability.
No, so I wouldn't treat it as a 0 day. It depends on if it's critical or high vulnerability. So say if it's CVSS score is 9 or 10, it's critical, and it is on the known exploited vulnerabilities. But then there's compensating controls, right? So maybe it's an internal system. Maybe it's a test. It may not even be considered as high priority as if it were a public facing server. Does that make sense? So we're also going to talk about risk and how to evaluate what's treated as, hey, we need to remediate this, within the next 72 hours, hopefully, or we need to remediate this within 10, 20, 30 days, whatever the guideline states for the company. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
so yeah, so the KEV is treated as a regular vulnerability with the remediation timeline.
Exactly. So it's
Okay.
still treated as a regular vulnerability, but if it's known and active and being exploited, you do want to give it more visibility and treat it more as a high priority than anything else. But again, we as a ISO, you're not just evaluating based on these CVSS scores or KEV, you're evaluating based on risk, which is what we haven't got to yet.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. We'll get to it. I'll come back to that in just a minute when we get to the risk and like score calculations too. Okay, go ahead, William.
In the examples you used, I've always thought of security like that also. So as far as like when it comes to a door, so you said the door lock is um a security. So if you had like a deadbolt on the same door, is that and you did not lock the actual door handle, is that like a compensating control? Does that make sense at all?
I wouldn't say that it's a compensating control. You never
Okay.
locked the first door to begin with. So I mean, you didn't lock the original lock to begin with. Either lock can be broken, right? So if either of those locks are broken, then either way it's a weakness.
Oh,
But I would say maybe if you had a broken lock or unlocked door, but you had one of those screens, like metal screens that you also had to get through, I would say
okay.
that's a compensating control.
All right. Thank you. That makes complete sense. Thank you very much.
No problem. Okay, so common frameworks and standards continued, because there's a lot of it here. There's also CIS benchmarks, so Center for Internet Security. So we touched on this also in our infrastructure and hardening of the servers, right? So tools like Rapid7, Tenable, they can scan your servers for misconfigurations and ensure that your servers are scanned to the recommended baselines. And then your DISA-STIGs, this is more DoD. Again, I have no military or background experience, so I don't go too much into this, but DISA-STIGs, it's very strict hardening standards according to the DoD. So you will also have those if you work in a military or government type environment. And then your frameworks, your standards and frameworks, these are the ones that are required for your organization to adhere to based on what you have, what your organization has implemented, right? So we've already covered these: NIST 853, NIST CSF, PCI, HIPAA, and 27001. Those are guidelines for your organization to be held to. So let's pause here. I want you guys to go into the school community. Alyssa, this is where I'm going to answer your question in more detail. Okay, so if you guys go to the school community, go to the classroom, and then go into the week 4 training resources. And then click on vulnerability risk calculator. And then hit the down arrow to download the file, and let me know when everybody has this pulled up. Let me see how you guys doing. Let's see. Does everyone have this pulled up? I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. Yes, everybody has yes. Okay. All right. So, Melissa, going back to your question, because I've been in a situation, of course, in the beginning of my career where it was like, this vulnerability says, CVSS score is 10. We should be remediating this now. This is what we should be focusing on. And of course, someone with more experience was like, okay, but even though it's 10 and it's likely to be exploited, it's an internal system. So the risk is not as high as our public facing systems. And this is why I say we also have to evaluate for risk, not just focus on the scoring, right? So I created, because you guys know I like creating little handy dandy sheets. I created this vulnerability risk matrix evaluation for like a beginner's guide to kind of help you guys understand the risk matrix and evaluating for risk, as opposed to just looking at the scores on a vulnerability report. So last week we had the vulnerability report and the scores. This week we're going to actually evaluate for risk of those scores, right? So here you have what is this calculator? It explains, what the workbook does, how you evaluate for risk, and then kind of key factors, right? So total risk score, risk level, and a recommended ISO action for you guys. And then key point, as I've been saying, is a high CVSS score does not automatically mean high risk. Context matters, and that's where we evaluate for risk. So the 4 scoring categories that we have is the CVSS score, right? So how severe is the vulnerability based on the CVSS score? So that is one area that we look at. And then exploitability, which is the KEV score, right? That's one area that we look at. Asset criticality. Now, this is where the risk really comes in. It's how important is the system that has this vulnerability, right? If it's a test dev system, so it's just a test environment that has dummy data, even if it does have a 10 for a critical vulnerability and a 5 for the fact that it has a vulnerability that's likely to be exploited, if this system gets popped, we really don't care, right? Like it was a test system that never had any real value to it other than testing. However, if the risk increases if it's an internal business system, a domain controller, a prod server, or sensitive data, right? And then we also have to evaluate on whether or not that asset, what exposure that asset has. So is it fully segmented? So remember, well, I don't know if we necessarily talked about network segmentation, but is the network fully segmented? So for network segmentation, and we may have touched on it, let's say we have our medical devices, right? So our medical devices should sit on their own segmented network away from the laptops, right? So you don't want your laptops and your medical devices on one network, because if the laptop, let's say this network gets penetrated and a vulnerability is exploited, however, someone gets into this network, we don't want them to be able to pivot and access our sensitive medical devices, right? So that's network segmentation. And then is it, internal but accessible? And then is the asset internet facing? And then how the total risk is calculated. So total risk score is vulnerability plus exploitability, asset criticality, and exposure. So that's how you evaluate for risk and not just look at scores, right? You look at several other factors, and then you have a minimal possible score 4, maximum possible score of 20 on this risk calculator. And then an example would be a severity 5 plus exploitability 3, criticality 5, exposure 5. You have a total of 18 for critical. Risk rating thresholds, we have our low, medium, critical, and high. Low, of course, we can accept or just monitor the risk. Medium, scheduled remediations. High is a priority, prioritize the fix, and then critical, immediate action or escalate. And then we have some instructions here on how to step-by-step use the calculator. I'm about to go over it with you guys, so I'm not going to go in detail with that. Then we have like an example walkthrough. So I do have some beginner prompts. So if you guys go into the school community, again, you guys don't have to do this, but just here there's a beginner lab assignment that we have some prompts, and next week we're going to go into more advanced prompting. So FYI, there is some prompts there for you guys to practice after the class. So it'll give you a sample scenario. So using those prompts, you'll get a scenario like you find a CVE on your public facing payroll server. The CVSS score is 9.8. It's listed in the CISA, known exploited vulnerabilities, KEV catalog, and no authorization required, right? It's going to have, it's public facing, the critical score is high, total risk score. It's gonna, at the end of the day, you guys want to evaluate for risk, and it's going to tell you that it's critical, immediate action is needed, and you're going to escalate it. And then I just have some instructor notes for you guys, learning objectives. So students should understand risk, severity plus context, not severity alone, key teaching points and things like that. So it's all here in your workbook, what we're covering today. And then we have your risk matrix on the second tab. So your risk matrix shows, what your low scoring would look like. So if your CVSS score is between 0 and 3.9, it's minor info. Disclosure requires local access. As you continue to get higher up in severity, you'll see medium and high. I'm not going to go through all of it, but your risk matrix is here, and then you have your risk rating thresholds and your ISO actions on, recommended actions for what you should take. So let's say your score range is between 4 and 8. That is a low. So again, accept and monitor, document the risk, and reassign for next scheduled review. If it's between 9 and 14, you'll have medium, schedule remediation, 15 to 17, prioritize a fix, accelerate remediation, notify management if needed, and then 18 to 20, critical, immediate action, escalate, patch now, isolate if needed, escalate to supervisor. Now, when I say patch now, unless it's a 0-day vulnerability, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be able to patch it now, right? Unless it comes out in some type of corporate email where it's, hey, you guys need to get on this, remediation needs to happen within, the next 72 hours, preferably, or 10 days. That's the only time people are going to move quick. Otherwise, they're typically going to ensure that there's compensating controls, and that there is it's monitored closely. And keep in mind, we're still going to talk about compensating controls after we get through this as well. Speaking of getting through this, just a moment. I just need to make sure. Oh, I'll do that in just a second. I just need to make sure Miss Ashley has access to the meeting. Um, okay, so vulnerability risk evaluation matrix calculator. So this is actually your calculator where you guys can actually work inside of this workbook. So the prompts that I gave you, and I'm going to show you how to use it in a minute, but the prompts that I gave you in the beginner prompts will actually spit you out a scenario. And from here, you'd step through the scenario. It's already kind of filled in for the first ones, right? So you guys can kind of see an example of how it works. But the scenario is going to give you a vulnerability CVE ID, an asset name, and then you are going to be responsible for figuring out the vulnerability severity score. I mean, at the end of the day, the total risk score, right? So if you change these columns, then you'll see that the risk level and the ISO action will change as well. So I built that in so that it gives you guys a little bit of automation, and then notes justification here so you guys can actually input some manual notes if you guys wanted to. So now let's pull up those prompts. Go into school and download the beginner lab assignment. And I just want to show you guys how to step through it. We'll step through a couple of them before we get back to the theory portion so you guys know how to use it. And then while you guys are pulling that up, give me just a second. Let me just make sure Miss Ashley has access. Gave her the access, and then okay, everyone have the prompts pulled up?
Yes.
Okay. All right. It's ready. And then let me see. I don't know where I put the it's here. Okay. It's, right. So scenario one, it says you have a CVE. So what I would want you guys to do is like if you guys were home, right, and practicing these, from the first scenario, you would actually maybe I should start here. So it has instructions. You read first for each scenario, read the scenario carefully, answer the ISO thinking questions, assign scores for vulnerability, severity, exploitability, asset criticality, enter your scores into your calculator, review the total risk score, confirm if the system generated ISO action makes sense, and then write a short justification, 1 to 2 sentences, not really, but you guys kind of get it. So you would come back into your workbook, you paste the new CVE that you guys have from your scenario, and then you have your asset. So you would copy that asset into your workbook, your asset name, and then you would come back here and it says scenario. So a CVSS 9.8 vulnerability was identified on an internal test web server. There is no known exploit and the system is not internet facing. So you would come back into that's your scenario. So you would come back into here. Your notes are that it's not internet facing, right? The vulnerability score was 9. So it's going to be high, right? Because it said 9.8. Um, Said vulnerability was identified on an internal test web server. There's no known exploit and the system is not internet facing. So the exploit score would be low because there's no known exploit, right? The asset criticality score was high. The exposure score was low because it was not internet facing, right? And then it gives you an automatic total risk score of 12. This is a medium schedule remediation and it's not internet facing, right? So this is kind of how you practice walking through. And this is just beginner scenarios for you guys. I have advanced prompts that we're going to do next week, but kind of get you guys into the habit of what am I looking at? What should I be documenting? Let's say this was a poem and there was something that needed to be remediated, but it was going to take more than 90 days. This is exactly sort of like what it would look like on that poem, you tracking of your assets. Go ahead, intro.
I just have a question. You said that asset criticality score on this one would be a high. Why would it be a high?
Mhm.
But I'm sorry.
The asset criticality. So the CVS, I'm sorry, you caught me. Okay. So okay, you're right. The asset criticality score is not high. It's a test server. The vulnerability score was
Right, it's
high though.
high.
Right.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
have that as a
Yes.
5. Okay, all right.
Okay. Yes. Sorry.
I was just
So
testing
yes,
you.
you so funny. Look, I told you I took my little old lady nap. I woke up like 5 minutes before the class started. Okay. So good catch. So that's pretty much how you step through it, right? I just for the first, like for this next week that you guys are working on this, I kind of just want you to play around with it. Because again, this is actually what you'd be evaluating on the job, right? This is what I see every day. What is it, internal? Is it external? What information does it hold on it? Does it hold PHI? And then that determines, how we're going to prioritize the patching of that asset. Does anyone have any questions there? Does anyone want to walk through a scenario to get used to doing it on your own?
Yes,
Okay.
we all do, don't we, class?
Yes. Yeah, right. Okay. Take the I'm gonna take scenario 2. Intro, you taking scenario 2? I know you somebody said yes.
Oh, yeah,
Who
I'll
said
do it.
okay. All right, go ahead and share your
You
screen.
want me to share? Okay.
Yeah.
Can y'all see that?
Yep. Look at you got the side by side going.
I'm an old lady, so I have to keep all my stuff where I can see it. All right, so scenario 2, medium severity, high risk. And this one is the payroll app prod. So, we're talking production stuff, which already is a little bit scary, and payroll. So it's got it's a payroll application that would mean it's got sensitive data. It's
Yep.
internet facing, which means that the exposure score. Let me start at the beginning. The vulnerability severity score. Well, it's a 6.5, so that was a medium. And then the exploitability score. Ugh, it's going to be, public exploit code is available. So that's going to be a high critical. The asset criticality score is also going to be a high critical because that is a high value asset since it has that sensitive data, is internet facing, and that public exploit code is available. And the exposure score is also going to be a 5 because it is internet facing. That gives us an 18 critical immediate action escalate. We're gonna put in a hot fix to get this patched and turn get this taken care of tonight when everybody logs off, because
Yeah.
we can't have my payroll information out there. I don't
Right.
want people seeing all them buckets I'm making.
Right. Okay. So, I was going to go back to Melissa. So you see how, even though the CVSS score was only a 6, but because the exploit and the type of system it was raised it back to a critical.
Yep, I understand that
Yes.
now. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah. Mhm.
All right, good job, Intro. Anybody else want to practice one? It's okay. All right, you guys can practice and then let me know what you guys think later. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Like I said, next week we're still gonna talk about vulnerability management. We're going to go deeper into not only these scenarios, but if you notice the beginner prompts actually have your answers in there. Next week the answers will not be in there. And you'll have to do a little bit more digging to figure out the answers. And then we're also going to add on how to map back those vulnerabilities back to your NIST controls. Again, it all just continues to tie together. So let me share my screen again and we will continue on. Okay, so that's your vulnerability risk calculator. And then example. So we just walked through a couple of scenarios. So the example is pretty clear. So the flow is the tool finds the vulnerability. Oops. The tool finds a vulnerability. You have your CVSS score, your EPSS score, and then you're found on the KEV list. And then at a map to NIST controls CIS misconfigurations and then business critical systems. So I created a little image to show you that example flow. And of course, you guys will have this training in the training material so you can go back and reference it. But the tool finds a vulnerability and it just, all flows like this. All right. Compensating controls. So compensating controls are security measures already in place that reduce the risk of a vulnerability being exploited. So ISOs look for what's protecting this system right now, right? So common compensating controls are your multi-factor authentication. Go ahead, Melissa.
I'm sorry. Could you go back to that previous slide?
Yeah.
So when you say the tool finds the vulnerability, is the tool just scanning? Like, how often is it scanning to find that vulnerability, or how does that really work?
So it depends on the tool itself. So in the frequency of the scan is set up by the engineer based on agreed upon scanning levels, right? So let's say, for example, one organization is like, it's too much to scan on a nightly basis. So we want this to kick off during non-prod hours, at 8 p.m. on a Sunday night. So it can scan weekly 8 p.m. on a Sunday night if that's what the business has agreed to. If the tool has agents, so it's not just an authenticated scan where there's credentials, say Tenable is given credentials to this server and then it scans a route at 8 p.m. on Sunday night. If it's like Rapid7 and you're able to put agents on that server, then the agent is always sending information over to Rapid7 because it has something that's always reporting in, right? So it really just depends on the organization, how often you guys have the scan set up. And even though it runs maybe weekly at 8 p.m., That doesn't mean that an ISO is going to look at that report on a weekly basis. The ISO may only run an actual vulnerability report and massage the data every 2 weeks. Usually at minimum every 2 weeks. Some people do it monthly when it's supposed to be done every 2 weeks. So it really just depends on the organization and the manpower.
Yep,
Make
thank
sense?
you.
You're welcome. So compensating controls, your common compensating controls, your multi-factor authentication. So it stops attackers even if credentials are stolen. So again, I mean, everybody should know about, multi-factor. You always have something, that you have something. So you log into a system, it sends you a code, and then you can use that code to actually access. So if someone were able to take your username and your password, they would, if they don't have the code, then of course they still can't get in. Your endpoint detection and response. So let's say there is a vulnerability that's found on a laptop. Let's say there's some type of Microsoft patching that has come out. They've released new vulnerabilities. It's on your laptop, but you have an endpoint detection and response tool that's installed on that laptop that makes it much harder for folks to actually exploit that vulnerability, or at least it's able to pick up quickly on when there's malicious activity occurring on that laptop. Network segmentation. Again, we talked about that, limits access between systems, so that's a compensating control, stops attackers from moving laterally. Your web application firewall, so it filters malicious web traffic. So even if there is some type of SQL vulnerability that exists, SQL vulnerability, your web application firewall will filter malicious traffic and hopefully stop attackers from actually getting through. So example scenario of what a compensating control would be for a web app that has like a critical vulnerability, CVSS score of 9.8. No controls means that it's internet facing. There's no web application firewall. There's no monitoring on it. This is going to be a critical risk, all right. Like it needs to be patched and something needs to happen immediately. But with controls, it sits behind a web application firewall. So even if that web app again has a vulnerability, they're going to have to break through that firewall first before they can even get to that vulnerability in that web app. And then of course monitored by the endpoint detection and response system. So hopefully that web app will have some type of defender or CrowdStrike or something on that endpoint, and then of course segmented from the network. So even if it is a vulnerable system and someone is able to exploit it, then it can't laterally move on to the rest of your critical assets. And then our key takeaways for today. Well, I should actually ask if everyone understands the compensating controls. I can't see you guys.
Yep.
And then our key takeaways for today are simple. Understanding what vulnerability data actually looks like beyond CVSS, and then prioritize vulnerabilities based on risk, and then evaluating risk based on compensating controls as well. And then again, next week, we're going to be talking about vulnerability management in detail, more detail, and practicing more advanced scenarios. And that is all that I have for you guys today. And then let me see.